Okay, great. It will just take a few minutes. So I would like to welcome all on this Saturday day, morning, night, it depends on where you are, in what part of the world, to another IDEA webinar. This webinar is called The Holistic Approach to Drama, Theater, and Education. And I'm most grateful to my friends and colleagues that have really sacrificed their time in a very specific and uncomfortable time. That means that our dear colleague from Canada, Matthew Sheahan, is really early in the morning. He had to wake up very early to join us. And our dear colleague, Andrew Byrne, who is from Victoria, from Australia, it is really late for him. It is 10 p.m. Here in Europe, it is really quite comfortable. For me, it is noon, a little afternoon, and it is a lovely day here in Belgrade. It is sunny. And for me, this is a remarkable occasion that we can all unite here on the Zoom platform. I'm in my living room / office. You're in your different parts of where you are, and you can watch this and you can follow this and you can hear some interesting and meaningful topics that we are involved with. The holistic approach to drama, theater, and education is something that I have been interested in for many years. In my own work, in my presentations, in what I do, I always focus on something that I call ecology of the soul. And ecology of the soul is really, in a way, inspired by many indigenous and native peoples and old anthropological researches on how people act and how they were. For example, one of the most inspiring words and concepts is Ubuntu from Africa that I really like to explore and study and try to somehow implement in all my work, in all my workshops. This is exactly how also in Serbia we used to have this old context of prelo. Prelo was a place where the whole community would gather and they would weave or they would do some little manual things together, usually around the fire. It was mostly, I must say, women and children. And then they would tell stories. So for me, this is the origin of the storytelling. It is the origin of the community. It is an origin of drama education because children would watch and they would also participate in these very old and beautiful customs that existed in my country, Serbia and Yugoslavia. What I want to say now is that I'm very excited to introduce, first of all, we travel all the way down under to the south of this planet, and we have a really great guest. Andrew Byrne is with us. So I will just read a few sentences about Andrew that I had an utmost pleasure to meet in person in Iceland, in Reykjavik, where we danced together at a wonderful dinner that was also organized for us. So Andrew has been teaching drama for 10 years in government secondary schools in Victoria, Australia. He's the descendant of convicts of the Guani Kurnai people of East Gippsland in, do I say it right? Gippsland in Victoria. He's an advocate for teaching First Nations content and concepts in the drama classroom. Andrew believes in giving back to the drama education community through volunteering his time in the boards of IDEA Victoria and Drama Australia. Thank you for this, Andrew. We also volunteer in the International Board of IDEA, and I have so many lovely, wonderful, committed elected officers also. He has worked in various roles with the Victorian curriculum and assessment authority and is completing a master's in education research at the University of Melbourne's Graduate School of Education. Welcome, Andrew. It is so nice to have you here. I will now turn off my camera so you have the floor, and see you soon. And let us hear what you have to say.
Okay. Great. Thank you very much for that lovely introduction. Let me just do the whole tech thing of sharing my screen, and I think almost got there. Okay. Hello, everybody. Hi, g'day, and Wominjeka. Wominjeka is hello and welcome in the Woiwurrung language of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations in Victoria. Let me just make sure. Yes, good. Okay, so this is Australia, but probably not as you know it. The Kulin Nation is the area of and around Melbourne, and is comprised of 4 language groups of the First Nations people that existed in Melbourne pre-colonisation. So you can see right down the bottom of your screen, that's where if you're looking at it on the right-hand side, that's Victoria. Before colonisation, or as it is now in Australia more commonly known, invasion, there were many dialects spoken in this country. Over 250 Aboriginal languages were spoken around Australia at the time of British invasion. There were many dialects within each language group. Today, only about 120 First Nations languages are still spoken. It's really about 60 that are spoken in a more fuller form. And many of those languages, many of the 120, are at risk of being lost forever. It's estimated that over 750,000 Aboriginal people inhabited the island continent of Australia in 1788. So this is, as I said, this is what Australia looked like pre-invasion. And today, in 2022, interestingly, there are approximately 750,000 Aboriginal people in Australia, which makes up 3% of our population. So since pre-colonisation, pre-invasion to today, it's the same population. It's actually growing at the moment, which is a wonderful thing. Post-invasions, many First Nations people were decimated in massacres or died from diseases that were brought into the country by the colonisers. Children were forcibly taken away from their families and their culture to have the black bred out of them. These children are our stolen generation. Although some would say our country has never seen war on our land, there is the blood of thousands and thousands and thousands of First Nations people running through the rivers of this great nation. I live on Bunurong country. You can see that down the bottom in the centre of your screen. And I work on Wurundjeri Woiwurrung country, which is the red section just a little bit above that. So I live and work just on the border of where those two lands meet. I pay my respects to all First Nations people in this country and to all First Nations people in the world. I would like to acknowledge any First Nations person with us today. I acknowledge my ancestors, the Gunai Kanai people from East Gippsland in Victoria. And you can see them on the bottom right hand of your screen. That's that dark blue section. That's where my ancestors come from. In Australia, our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people were the first storytellers, first dancers, first musicians, first artists of the land. And we have the longest continuing culture on this planet, over 60,000 years, and are continuing to tell stories through creating cutting-edge contemporary work, most often a fusion between the cultural, spiritual, political, and the traditional. Australia was never ceded. Australia was, always will be, Aboriginal land. And I pay my respects to elders past, present, and future. So what I've just done there is what's called an acknowledgement of country. And that's a tradition that First Nations people in Australia did pre-colonisation, where if you were coming to visit somebody else in their land, you would welcome them. I can't do a welcome to country, which is something that only an elder can do, but I can do an acknowledgement of country. And it's an important respect that we give during meetings at my school. If we have an assembly, we do an acknowledgement of country. And it's just that taking that moment to acknowledge that we are on the land of the traditional people from Australia. So, as I said, I'm the proud descendant of convicts. Convicts who were sent to Australia for committing mostly petty crimes. One of my ancestors stole a loaf of bread and her punishment was to be sent to the penal colony known as Australia. And I'm also the descendant of the Gunai people. And just recently, I've found out that I'm also the descendant of the Bidawal people, which you can see on the far right side of your screen. For reasons I'm not going to go into today, I didn't know about my Aboriginality growing up. I didn't know that I had Aboriginal heritage until I was in my 20s. At first, I was really uncertain about how to connect to my unknown culture. And it wasn't until my teaching degree, which I began in my late 20s, that I really started to reflect on it, and also really started to reflect on the lack of First Nations visibility in education. There was minimal discussion about it during my degree, and even reflecting on my own schooling, I remembered that I was really taught nothing about the Aboriginal people of Australia. Apart from the fact that they were savages, that they were hunter-gatherers, and that colonisation saved them and taught them, gave them education, gave them religion. So then when I started teaching in 2013, I knew that I had to be a beacon of change. So as was said in my lovely introduction, I'm the head of performing arts at Paran High School in Melbourne. And Paran High School is a new urban school. So it's a vertical school. We don't have any outdoor areas, no green areas. But it's part of a new species of vertical schools that's being built in Melbourne due to limited space in urban areas. As was also said, I'm the president of Drama Victoria and on the board of Drama Australia. So we are really, I think we're really forward thinking in terms of teaching for reconciliation. Reconciliation in Australia is about, in some ways, like making amends for the past and coming together, making sure that our First Nations people are acknowledged and respected, and that culture, history and perspectives of First Nations people is known by everybody. So we do a lot of wonderful things with Drama Victoria and Drama Australia, and there's our websites down there if you want to go and have a look at what we do. So also I'm studying Masters of Education and Research, and my focus is how teachers and students can effectively and meaningfully produce contemporary Indigenous theatre in the drama and theatre classroom. I'll go into that a little bit more later. I just wanted to touch on my use of language today. You will hear me say First Nations, you'll hear me say Indigenous, you'll hear me say Aboriginal and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander. Australia is a large country. Above Australia, there are the Torres Strait Islands. So that is where the term Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander is commonly used in Australia. Indigenous is also used, but what is becoming more commonly accepted as a term of reference for our Aboriginal people is the term First Nations, particularly in Victoria. So I mostly use the term First Nations, but it is intertwined with the term Indigenous, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander. So I just wanted to make that clear about the use of language. Okay, so in Victoria, in Australia, where in our curriculum, we have our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and cultures. And this is threaded throughout our Australian curriculum, plus also from my perspective in the Victorian curriculum, where we have cross-curriculum priorities. These cross-curriculum priorities include the Asia and Pacific, and can include sustainability and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and cultures. And the cross-curricular priorities are about saying that across all learning areas, whether it be English, maths, history, drama or music, that these three areas should be taught across all year levels, across all curriculums, across all key learning areas. In Victoria in particular, we have our curriculum, the arts, and then the strand of drama. And within the strand of drama, we have these 4 areas, the 4 standards. We have explore and express idea, drama practices, present and perform ideas, and to respond and interpret. Interestingly, the only mention of First Nations perspectives in the drama curriculum is under the respond and interpret. So this is the area that you would perhaps watch a piece of theatre and you would then analyse and evaluate the piece of theatre, or perhaps you would read a text and then you would analyse the text. But if I come back to this, it's not specified under the practical areas, those explore and express, the drama practices, and present and perform ideas. So the curriculum doesn't stipulate that students should be engaging with First Nations perspectives through a performative nature, through embodying characters, that it should only be in that analytical area. And that's where I really disagree. And that's the work that I do. In Victoria as well, in our senior years of study, we have a subject called VCE, which is the Victorian Certificate of Education. And this is the study that students will do to gain entry into university. And so this is the study that is scored and gives them their tertiary score, which will then allow them to get into certain areas of university. You must reach a certain mark to get into medicine, for example. So we have a subject called theatre studies. And in theatre studies, it's all about interpreting scripts. So a student gets a script, say Macbeth, and then they interpret that through acting and directing and design, like set design or lighting design or costume design. And then they perform it to an audience. In the scope of study for theatre studies, it doesn't specify the theatre style of contemporary Indigenous theatre. It specifies Greek theatre, commedia dell'arte, realism, epic theatre, theatre of the absurd, musical theatre, but there is no specific mention of a contemporary Indigenous theatre style. And again, this is somewhere where I disagree and an area that I work in. So yes. So how do I work in this area? This is a really contentious discussion that is had amongst educators in Victoria. If my classroom is filled with non-Indigenous, majority Eurocentric, white, perhaps there is some Asian students, some Middle Eastern students, some Italian students, but I have no First Nations students, then how am I able to produce work in the classroom or in my position, explore texts by Aboriginal playwrights where I would be asking the students to perform as Aboriginal characters? How do I do that? So this resource here was produced a few years ago now. I think it was formally produced released in 2020, and it has a lot of advice for teachers on how to tackle this really sensitive and complex issue in the classroom. It was produced in collaboration with Ilbidgery Theatre Company, which is a First Nations led theatre company. They produce original works. It's all First Nations artists. It was instigated by Dr. Rachel Forgars from Monash University, and Drama Victoria was a collaborator in the process as well. So this resource is like my guide. I was actually a part of the advisory panel, which was put together to develop the resource. The resource was a consultation between First Nations artists and educators in Victoria. And from those panel discussions, Dr. Rachel Forgars and Danielle Haradsky mined through all of the data and came up and wrote and produced the First Nations document there. So that is available for anyone. It is a free resource for anybody. And there's also, if you want to see a discussion about the resource, there is a video on YouTube called Teaching First Nations Content and Concepts, NAIDOC Week panel discussion. So that's there for anyone to address as well. Okay, so in Victoria, well, in Australia, with our curriculum, the students are able to either work in the area of devising, where they create an original piece of work, or they can work with interpreting scripts. That is an option that's left up to the teacher to decide. I know with my year 7s and 8s, I do a combination of devising and script work. But then from year 9 onwards, I mostly work with scripts because my school offers the VCE Theatre Studies pathway. So in year 11 and 12, my students are only going to be working with scripts. So I scaffold that learning from year 7 to 12. But in year 7 and 8, I do some devising. So there are some amazing teachers in Australia that are doing great work with devising, but my focus is on interpreting scripts. And so when we are looking at interpreting scripts, we're also always looking under the guise of what is a theatre style and what are the conventions of that theatre style. I'm sure everybody here has heard of Brecht and epic theatre, and that the conventions of epic theatre include techniques like narration, direct address, the use of placards, historification, fragmentary set, fragmentary costume, changing in front of the audience, the Verfremdungseffekt. So we understand that epic theatre is a culmination of those techniques or those conventions, as we call them in Australia. So what is contemporary Indigenous theatre? Well, this is a really, again, another contentious discussion in Australia, that are we westernising the work of our First Nations people? They argue that they're just creating work. They're creating work which is a combination of their traditional practices and the contemporary theatrical forms. But the problem for that with me as a teacher is that I need my students to be able to have these conventions to work within. If they're going to see a play by a First Nations playwright, then they need to understand what the conventions are. So contemporary Indigenous theatre. I'll skip past that. So is it a theatre style? I think I've gone over that. I'll skip past that. So this, through my research and reading into academic papers written by First Nations academics about what theatre style is, these are the lists of conventions that I've sort of drawn together that really encapsulate, if anything, what does make up a contemporary Indigenous theatre style. Excuse me for a second. So my research, I'm going to go through just a little bit about what I found in my research. I interviewed 6 teachers who have been doing this work in their classroom, working with texts. So I'm just going to briefly go through what it is that they've been doing in their classrooms with their students. And then at the end, I'm going to just quickly talk about what I've done in my classroom with my students and show you an example of their work. So these are like the emerging 3 things that have come out. It's really that concept of like the why, the what, the who, and the how. So why are they doing it? What have they done? How have they done it? And who are they doing it for? Intent is a really important concept when doing this. What is your intention in doing the work? For me, it's about making sure that as many students that I teach as possible are engaging with First Nations histories, First Nations perspectives, and First Nations culture, which is that cross-curriculum priority. So I'll start with one of my participants who studies the play Honey Spot by Jack Davis with their Year 7 class. This teacher will not actually work with acting. So they work with their students around sound and lighting design and how sound and lighting can be used for symbolism and meaning making. So her students, they read through the script, they analyze the script and create scene summaries, and then in pairs and trios, they create For a specified scene, they create a sound and lighting design concept. So she works with them on, with their school, they have in year 7 a unit on philosophy, and she begins the unit discussing thoughts, beliefs, and morals. And then she works into Honey Spot, exploring stereotypes and prejudice. So through this concept of design, she explores how sound and music and sound effects can communicate meaning and messages for an audience. So we don't always have to be performing. We can explore text through the through stagecraft. Right, the next teacher I spoke with, again, works with Honey Spot with her year 7 students. They do a unit on tension. And so they divide the entire play up into scenes, and then the students create an interpretation of the scenes, but with a real focus on building and maintaining tension. So the play Honey Spot is about the tensions between a white man and an Aboriginal family that his daughter has befriended. So it really deals with racism, but comes from a teen perspective. She also works with, the other plays, City of Gold, 7 Stages of Grieving, and Black Diggers are some of the examples she's worked with her year 11 students through VCE Theatre Studies. And she's really focused on exploring theatre styles through script interpretation, and the students collaborate to develop a creative interpretation of a script to the audience. And in this case, the audience is friends, family, and other members of the school community. And so the students, again, they put on the full play. They put on a production, including set design, lighting, sound design, costume, hair and makeup, and props. What she really spoke about was the initial process of interpreting the script. That research was really pivotal. I realise I'm going to run out of time, so keep going. We've got another teacher who explores the play Black Diggers from the perspective of a director, and they direct scenes with the students. And again, he really spoke about the importance of researching, making sure that the students delve deep into the play, understand the perspectives and the context, the time and the place of the play. And so it's not a performative assessment. It's like a workshop in the classroom where the students direct a scene with other students in the class acting. So that's another way that you can go about exploring the work. And then there was another school which had 2 teachers, and this was a fantastic discussion I had with this school. They were the first school that I came across that had actually staged a performance of a contemporary Indigenous play with non-Indigenous cast. They collaborated with a First Nation artist, educator and performer by the name of Kamara Bell Wykes, who was one of the contributors to the advice document. And Kamara came in and workshopped with the students. So one important thing is to try and make connections if you can. And Kamara came in and worked with the students on developing the characters and characterizations and providing them advice on what to do and what not to do. And that really comes down to the idea of how can non-Indigenous actors play Indigenous characters. And that's really about what we talk about and what I work with my students about, is about playing the truth of the character. We never put on accents. We never play a stereotype. We play the character. So in my school context of the example that I'm about to show you, my students put on a production of Black Medea, which is a modern recontextualization of Medea, and written by a First Nations playwright called Wesley Enoch. And here we go. No. Here. So here you can see my students who were very multicultural. There was Sudanese, Eritrean, Vietnamese, Greek, Italian, Australian, Maori, and they were able to put on an interpretation of the play through symbolic costume design, emblematic and symbolic set design, and through, as I said, playing the truth of the character. If I can, I'll just share one more thing with you. I realise I'm going to go into some time. So this is the opening scene from Black Medea. The stage directions say that, you know, Medea walks the perimeter of the space, a desert wind blows, the walls come alive, she winks in and out of sight, she listens to the wind, and that she enters with her child, and then she delivers her battle cry. So in Black Medea, Medea has left her family and her country to go and live with Jason in the city. Jason, her husband, is a miner and is, you know, there's very big arguments and complexities in Australia about mining and traditional land. So Medea and Jason are living away from their country, and he's stripping the land of their natural minerals and ore, irons and ores. And they're also struggling financially, and there's domestic violence in this play. And the chorus are Medea's ancestral spirits that speak to her throughout the play and trying to get her to take their son back to their land. And so I'll just show you now just a really quick clip of my students interpreting that opening scene. You can see what they did. Sorry, I should say we've got the girls on stage are the chorus, and the ones entering, we had 5 girls playing Medea. They played Medea throughout different parts of the play. So the final advice for everybody from my research is that if you are interested in doing this work in your classrooms, that you do the research, you look outside the world of the play. We do role identification, which is the students saying their culture before the play to the audience, and then identifying the character that they're playing and the cultural identity of that character, to play the truth, to make connections, to apply design, and to always, in your classroom, acknowledge racism immediately. And I've gone way over time. I'm really sorry, Matthew.
Oh, I just want to thank you for this wonderful presentation. And Matthew will not mind. We can go, we don't have a fixed time when we end. So Matthew can also take his time.
Sure.
And I just want to say that what a remarkable presentation. I really love the advice. But what I miss the most is not to be able to see live this amazing performance that you did with your students, because it's very strong and very meaningful, and you can see how much they believe in what they're speaking, you know, how much they really believe in the words. Just as the same, I miss that Matthew and you cannot come tonight. I'm performing in Belgrade in a theater, so I wish you could see our performance, but it's okay with my group. So thank you so much. And now I would like to invite, please be there, and you can watch Matthew's performance, and then you will demonstrate a presentation, then we will all come together. So I would like to ask Matthew to turn on his camera and his microphone. Hello. Good morning again.
Hello. Good morning. You know, actually, Andrew, thank you for taking more time, because I had time to get more coffee. And like, because it's still 6:44. It's still dark here.
I just want to, I can imagine. I just want to say one sentence that I want to say a special thank you to Matthew, because in a way he was working with me, and we were, he was an actor in a little sketch performance that we did about the 30 years of idea. And he was really wonderful in this, and took on the task. We had little time to prepare, but I think it was really nice. So
it was amazing.
Special thank you to you, Matthew, for this. I will turn off my camera now, so the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much, Sonia, and thank you, Andrew, for your presentation. I will say before I start my presentation that there is a little bit of a different approach, and I want to suggest that when talking about ways in which to incorporate Indigenous pedagogy or theater or drama, I mean, like, you know, it's always important to, as Andrew talked about, teachers talking with community and building those relationships with First Nations people. That's like what's most important. And so I'm going to share my screen here. All right. And so, hello, everyone. My name is Matthew Sheahan, and I'm the current president of the Council of Ontario Drama and Dance Educators. I reside in Belleville, Ontario, which is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat Huron peoples. In Canada, much like Australia, it has become customary to offer land acknowledgements recognizing the traditional First Nations and Indigenous peoples from your region. But land acknowledgements, however, are tricky things. All I have done in mine is to situate myself on others' traditional territory, but I haven't done or asked for anything more than that. Leading up to 2018, in an act of reconciliation, we at Code decided to create a land acknowledgement. Recognizing the problematic nature of land acknowledgements, as identified in my own, we crafted what we refer to as Code's call to action. Oops, I don't know why there we go. Which I would like to share with you right now. Code acknowledges that our association spans land across Turtle Island, which is the traditional territory of many Indigenous peoples. We honor them as the original storytellers and stewards of this land. May we never forget their legacies, and may we learn well the lessons their descendants have to teach us about living on and with the earth. We will practice a sign of respect, acknowledge the rich history of these lands and the Indigenous peoples, honor the truth of the past, and uphold our original treaty, the Two-Row Wampum, to peacefully care for the land and each other through our drama and dance teaching practices. Now, I'm going to pause for a second to talk a little bit about terminology. So in Canada, we have taken calling as a more of an inclusive umbrella term Indigenous people, because we recognize First Nations, Métis, and Inuit as separate. And so when we're referring to Indigenous people ubiquitously, we often will refer to Indigenous people, but it's more customary to know if you're like I am right now beside the Tyonega territory, which is the home of the Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte. So if I were speaking directly to someone who's Haudenosaunee, Gunagahaga, or Mohawk, I would speak directly to that person from that nation. But when referring to things in an umbrella way, I would refer to Indigenous peoples. It was important for our call to action to speak, to spark further discussion around decolonization and reconciliation, and not to be an end in itself. We recognize that as drama and dance educators, because our association is drama and dance, I myself am a drama teacher, so I will be speaking more to that today. We are privileged to be able to work with students in ways that activate and access their mind, body, heart, and spirit. We are situated in such a way that we can have these discussions through the work that we do with our students, and we can further the work that needs to happen in our country, not just through what we teach, but how we teach. This need for action and one avenue for taking what we're going to do to discuss today. This is about taking that action. As a settler in Canada, I recognize that we're all treaty people, unless you're coming from unceded territory, which we do have in Canada as well, Indigenous and non-Indigenous alike. And we're all on our own path of reconciliation, whether we know it or not. My own journey began in earnest in 2011. At that time, I applied for and received the job of department head for the Arts and Indigenous Studies. An applicant for the position needed a specialist in art or Indigenous Studies in order to qualify. I had a specialist in drama, applied for the job, and was successful. As the department head of Arts and Indigenous Studies, Indigenous education was my largest gap. Being able to identify this as a gap most necessary to bridge, I set off on a years-long journey that would transform my practice and alter the trajectory of my teaching career. This was a journey filled with additional courses and qualifications in Indigenous studies, multiple conference opportunities, workshops, literature, and re-examination of my own practice in everything that I teach and how I work with and develop relationships with my students. This is what leads me to the topic of our conversation today. I believe and contend that drama and education connects firmly with the Indigenous learning model and as a vehicle for holistic education that meets the physical, spiritual, emotional, and intellectual needs of our students, and is one of the pathways in order to identify and proliferate conversations, activities, and exercises that decolonizes our institutions, breaks down barriers, and helps with the formation of compassionate, well-rounded individuals who will go out into our world to make the changes that are needed, some may say required, for there to be real transformation. But what is the Indigenous learning model, and how does it impact pedagogy? Simply put, it is planning and execution in our lessons that meets the needs of the mind, body, spirit, and heart. But what does it look like? The Indigenous learning model is a circle. It is a continuum where what and how we are teaching in our drama or theater programming needs to be honoring and valuing the contributions, reactions, and needs of the students in front of us. As articulated on the website First Nations Pedagogy, the First Nations learner dwells in a world of continual reformation, where in interactive cycles rather than disconnected events occur. In this world, nothing is simply a cause or an effect, but the expression of the interconnectedness of life. These relationships are circular rather than linear, holistic and cumulative rather than compartmentalized. The mode of learning for First Nations people reflects and honors this understanding. How does this connect with what we are doing in drama and theater and education? The circular and interactive nature of the Indigenous learning model and the pedagogy complements and extends the circular nature of the creative process and the need for multiple access points and provocations with our students. Also, it reflects the embodied learning that takes place in our classes, which develops empathetic, well-rounded, and collaborative humans. Indigenous education is twofold. We've discussed how pedagogical approach connects to our practice as drama teachers, but how do we access Indigenous voices and knowledge free from appropriation of voice and culture in the classroom? This is a tricky thing. I myself identify as a settler on these lands, and I'm not a member of the community, nor can I speak to the intricacies of culture or history in an authentic manner. As much as we need to reflect the learners in our classrooms, we need to also expose them to the truths, stories, and experiences that disrupt the colonial narrative and honor a plethora of voices. I was having a conversation recently with two colleagues and a friend of mine about if it is appropriate for white students to perform as Indigenous people. Now, I'm going to speak a little bit differently than what Andrew was talking about, because we were talking about the history of redface in North America, especially through the portrayal of Indigenous people in Hollywood. And we've taken a slightly different path and recognizing that tradition for us moving forward, working in connection with community, that using text as a provocation would be key, and not using text for having white students to perform. I myself work in a predominantly rural, predominantly Caucasian school in Southern Ontario. And with that history of North American stage and film with white actors performing in redface, it's inauthentic and was often used to silence the true voice of Indigenous people. So we return to the question, how do we access Indigenous voices and knowledge free from appropriation of voice and culture in the classroom? And this is what I plan to offer you today. As a side note, I want to offer that it is always beneficial to bring in authentic voices in the classroom, that we should strive to build relationships with Indigenous communities. The activities we're going to run through right now are for non-Indigenous teachers working with diverse students. I work in a predominantly white school, as I said before, in a rural community. So approach one. So process drama and story drama is one approach we can use to really engage with and provoke students' imaginations, creativity, etc. A couple of these texts I've provided on the screen here come from a variety of different First Nations, Inuit, and Indigenous authors. So the story Not My Girl up there is written by an Inuit author and illustrator, telling the story of her grandmother's experiences returning home from residential school. I'm sure many of you have heard about Canada's dark legacy of the residential school system, which ran for over 100 years, and the last school only closing in 1996 when I was 16 in high school. And we didn't talk about these things in our history classes at that time. We didn't talk about these things in our drama classes. It was something that we're not proud of, but yet it was an entire system used to strip young children of their identities, their voices, and their cultures. So I've used all three of these books, Not My Girl, Hiawatha the Peacemaker, and Stolen Words, in my classes with my students in order to have them exploring a variety of different perspectives and creating things in response to the text. So if you've worked with or gone to webinars with practitioners like Patrice Baldwin or Jonathan Nealons, you've worked through different process dramas and worked through different process dramas with your students. The one thing I never do with these particular texts with my students is I don't take on the role of teacher and role. And the reason why I don't do that is recognizing my privilege and place as a settler on traditional Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Wendat Huron territory. And so we explore them in a variety of different ways, really pulling out the lessons, the themes, and different tropes we find throughout the text, and then using those to create some responses that were provoked by the students. So for instance, with Not My Girl, excuse me, I'm getting over a cold here, so my voice is a little ragged. With Not My Girl, we explore family, we explore isolation, we explore the nature of identity. And then what I have the students do, excuse me, is draw those things back to themselves and think about how they feel and how they react to those particular themes and reoccurring tropes throughout the text, and write responses from their perspective, and then meet together with their peers and create some collaborative stylized pieces exploring identity, exploring family. And I was really privileged to take a workshop at a code conference back in 2016 with an artist and educator named Rob Kempson, who talked about accessing student voice and then having those students merge their voices together in a way that was almost like a protective piece of armor. We talk about taking role as a way of protecting ourselves from like, you know, our own I don't know, let's say judgment around our performances. But when you have your own voice out there and have it melded with the people you're working with, and then put that forward together, it's really helps create that protective armor and really affirmative and actionable voice that you can take forward. Hiawatha the Peacemaker is written by Robbie Robertson, who was a member of the band, and also, if you've heard of the band, who used to be Bob Dylan's backup band, and then before striking off on their own as the band. And he has Mohawk ancestry and explored this story of Hiawatha and the Peacemaker. And my students found it really cool when we go through this story, because the Peacemaker, who brought the 5 nations of the Haudenosaunee together, was born on the shores of Tynanaga. Well, not on the shores, but he's from Tynanaga, which is a territory adjacent to our the town in which I work. And so they're always excited to read that story, because it's historical connections to that particular space that we're in. Now, second approach, I like the fact that Andrew brought up devising theater. So devised theater, collective creation, is another way in which we've been exploring Indigenous issues, history, and our relationship to that as settlers. And so in 2019, I created a piece that we performed with my students called A Call to Action. So in 2015, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada put forth their summary of 94 calls to action that the government of Canada, the people of Canada, and different provinces needed to enact in which to bring about reconciliation and decolonization and a path forward together all across Turtle Island, or North America and Canada. And so what we did with my students was we're predominantly non-Indigenous, predominantly Caucasian, and they created a series of different stylized pieces through movement, choral speaking, a variety of different techniques to explore those 94 calls to action. They're looking at ongoing long-term boil water advisories that exist on reserves in Canada. So for instance, there are some reserves in Canada that have had a boil water advisory where it's not safe to drink the water for over 20 years. Whereas there are towns not that far away where the infrastructure is sound and the water is safe to drink. So these are the types of issues they were exploring. In Canada right now, we still have an extremely racist piece of legislation called the Indian Act, which was enacted in 1876 and is still law in Canada. And so we are still a country that has a separate set of laws for Indigenous people. So let that sink in for a second. There's a separate set of laws that are still in place. They've been amended over the years, but it impacts the lives of Indigenous people in Canada. They explored that, and there was a variety of different reactions to things that we're hoping will lead to reconciliation. And we did this in consultation with my Indigenous education lead from my school board, who is a member of the Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte, and a Gunagahaga man. And he was blown away by the reactions of the students. And I believe a direct quote was what he said when he saw their entire devised piece called A Call to Action, was that if we could have more people working alongside us, creating such pieces of theater and drama, we would be working more towards reconciliation in this country. And he was really blown away. And we took that piece on the road to a variety of different elementary schools. And we also performed it at our school board for our school board trustees and the public. And also, so I'm about 2 hours from Toronto, which is the capital of Ontario. And we also performed it at a conference called Children, Youth and Performance at a theater called Young People's Theater, and to an audience there. And it provoked a lot of really good discussion. One of the keys to that piece was that we didn't just do the performance. After the performance, instead of exiting the stage, the students all sat down, and then we engaged in about a 15-minute discussion and question and answer period with our audience, about what came up for them, and trying to keep that conversation going, and really spark in everyone's mind who was there to experience it, what reconciliation looks like for them. What part did they play in reconciliation in Canada between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people? And so it was interesting because we always do Q&As. Like if I do a matinee with student audiences from elementary schools or secondary schools, we always have a question and answer. And it's usually about, how we put things together, et cetera. It was the first time we'd ever had a Q&A with an adult audience. And it was really, really cool to see the amount of engagement between the adults in the audience and the students on stage, so much so that the conversation would continue long after the 15 or 20 minutes we set aside for the conversation. And when the actual formal Q&A would end, you would see students from the performance and adults from the audience engaged in conversation off to the side. And that conversation about our place in Canadian history and a path forward was continuing and moving forward. And so that was really cool, because I believe that for there to be reconciliation, we have to take action. And that goes back to why with code, we don't have a land acknowledgement, we have a call to action, because we want everyone within our organization working toward provoking people to want to take action for reconciliation. And as artists and as educators and as drama and theater teachers, we have that with our students. We have those relationships to be able to make that happen. One more different provocation I want to talk about that's going to lead to a tangible example is around using Indigenous artists as provocation for creation. So this piece I'm showing you right now is from a Métis artist named Christy Belcourt, called Wisdom of the Universe. I'm extremely lucky because one Christian church in my town where I teach, as an act of reconciliation, in consultation with the artist, had recreated on their church a mural of Wisdom of the Universe. So my students and I are able to walk through the town and go physically to a recreation of this mural, as I said, with the artist's permission. And Christy came to Picton, where I teach, when it was for the grand unveiling of that mural. And I have the students, before they even know, like they don't know what the name of it is usually, I have them look at it and pull out, like, what do they see? What don't they see? And we can use that to create some stuff within our classes. But then I also have them take it, what lessons are they extracting from this piece? And they come up with all sorts of really great things around connection and the power of nature, and how everything comes back to nature and everything comes back to the land. And then from that, we're able to have them create some responses to that piece. And I'm going to get to that in a second, but I'm going to show you another. So this is a really great example of a Métis artist in Canada. And this, a little bit blurry, but this one here is called The Scoop by Kent Monkman. Sorry, I blew up the one image and it looked better on my screen, and it doesn't look that great here. But I really encourage everyone to look at this. Kent Monkman is an Anishinaabe artist, I believe, and Indigenous artist, and he creates some very provocative pieces. And so this piece called The Scoop was really encapsulating the role of the church and the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, in the removal of children from their parents to go to residential school. And so in it, you can see like, the mother being held back. That was one blown up image by the Mounties or the RCMP. And so with this piece, it's always, it really helps us look at certain things that have become ingrained in what's known as like the Canadian national identity. I'm using air quotes here, because like the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, or first the Mounties, I'll call them for short, were really created to police Indigenous peoples in Canada, and it played a huge role in removing them from areas to build the railroad that runs all the way across the country. So it's something that we didn't talk about a lot when I was a student in school, and there are a lot of really great provocative pieces from Kent Monkman. And he really gets you a question, like with this piece, we've had students pulling all sorts of things, like, ways that we can look at and then research and then create responses too. And it's interesting because like one tactic that I like to use with students is have them write letters that we don't send, but perform for audiences. And like I had some really great responses directed to the RCMP about their role in Canadian history and the church in this role that they played. The vast majority of residential schools were run by the Catholic Church, but also by other churches as well. Now, I want to talk directly about one example that came from Christy Belcour's Wisdom of the Universe. And you can find this example actually produced on an online drama and dance journal called Provocations. I really would encourage you to go to that Provocations drama and dance journal to look at all the stuff that's there. But under our student and teacher responses, a student of mine created a piece. We were working online. It was during the long shutdown during the pandemic, where we were trying to teach drama online, which was so much fun. And one of my students, Alice Graham, who's still a student in grade 12 now, was in grade 10 at this time, created a piece using images from her own home based upon a theme she pulled from Wisdom of the Universe. And the theme she pulled was about finding your place within all of existence. And she created a really awesome children's story called Gavin's Purpose, and then recorded it. And it's an audio children's story she made with iMovie, and it's posted on Provocations. And it's I told her she really needs to like submit that to a publisher and have it published like professionally, because it's a really engaging and amazing piece of work. So it was one way in which we're trying to utilize Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous artwork in the drama classroom to provoke creation from the students. So I liked the way that Andrew talked about intentions. And as we all know, the saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And I think intention is important, is extremely important. What is your intention in what you're creating or what you're using? And I liked when Andrew brought up about the texts or the styles that are listed in the curriculum. And I contend that like the curriculum in all countries, in a way, well, I believe that the institution I work for is hugely guilty of colonization and perpetuating colonization, because it's an ongoing process. And I think that we need to rethink how we do things and what we use. And it's a conscious choice we're making in what we're using with our students in the classroom. So, I mean, we could look at everything from a Eurocentric point of view. However, we need to shift away from that and bringing a diverse amount of voices. And this intersects whether we're talking about the LGBTQ2+ community, whether we're talking about addressing anti-Black racism, whether we're addressing status of refugees, any marginalized group or historically oppressed group within a country, that intersects. So space for diverse voices, representation does matter. And for me, working in a school that's predominantly Caucasian, it's also about representing things that are outside of the students' lived experience and having them sit with that discomfort that learning things can cause, because it's good to be made to feel uncomfortable by learning things that are awful from your country's history. Avoiding appropriation of voices, but focus on voice and learning to provoke responses that can be stylized and dramatized. I really liked Andrew's approach that he talked about from his research about exploring the role. I know that I said at the beginning that there were certain things I was going to talk about that we've decided that we were going to move away from, but I think about working in partnership and building those relationships that, as I talk about the next point, is really key. And Andrew talked all about that, which I thought was really cool. And I learned a lot from that presentation. Building relationships and community. We are drama teachers after all. I think that when we talk about holistic education, we need those students. And we do that. We build those relationships. Every time I go to a workshop or a conference talking about how we can utilize Indigenous pedagogy, we're talking about First Nations, Métis, and Inuit perspectives in Canada, it's about the approach. It's about that relationship building. It's about that community. it's about responding and being there for our students. And these are things we do as drama teachers, but it's about that intention. We need to be more intentional about it. Indigenous pedagogy is about an approach as much as about a shift in material focus. Don't be afraid to make mistakes, but learn from those mistakes. I had a conversation recently where we were talking about, you can make mistakes. If we're too afraid to make mistakes, we won't ever move forward. However, don't double down on mistakes, because a mistake made twice is still just a mistake. And embrace that discomfort that comes with learning stories and actual history. Because as I said before, my journey of reconciliation started really in earnest in 2011. And my entire focus, my entire career has shifted by all the relationships I built with Indigenous educators and Indigenous artists with whom I have the privilege of working with and learning from, and has taken me in an entire different direction than where I was early on in my career. And the last thing I want to talk about is that the path forward is a long and winding road. It's going to look different for every single person. When we're talking about from a Canadian perspective, and I'm really speaking about more of an Ontario perspective. Canada is huge, like Australia, and I can only speak to what we're doing in Ontario. And I know that amazing things are happening in different areas in Canada, but I can only speak about that from a code perspective and from an Ontario perspective. I really encourage everyone to look at the code website. We created a document in 2018 called In a Good Way, and it was created in consultation with Indigenous educators and artists, and with our colleagues at the First Nation, Métis, and Inuit Education Association of Ontario, or FNMI EAO for short, and really looking at how to decolonize our practice, how to embrace reconciliation is something that we're not just playing lip service to, but actively using in the classroom to create students, citizens, people who will go out in the world knowing their relationship with our history and wanting to make a different path forward. There's an old saying that we need to look at things 7 generations in the past and 7 generations in the future. The chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, now retired Senator Murray Sinclair, said that it's education that got us into this mess, referring to residential schools, and it's education that will get us out. And he talked about the fact that it was 7 generations that we had students in residential schools, and it will take us 7 generations to really reestablish that relationship in a productive way and move forward together in relationship. And that's what we're working toward right now. And that's why this work is so important. And thank you. That's my presentation.
And wonderful one as well. You have touched so much, Andrew. Yes, please come. And I would like everyone else also to join in, if you like, with your cameras. I want to thank you both, and Matthew, also a very, very remarkable presentation. And as we are starting our questions and answers session, I have a very concrete question because I need some clarification. Hello. Yes, Andrew?
Sorry, can I just have a moment just to respond to a couple of things that's come up from Matthew's presentation?
Yes,
and it's that wonderful thing of writing a script and then going off the script and then missing bits of the script that were really important. I really understand, Matthew, what you were saying about playing First Nations characters. And it was something that in the advisory panel, in the development of the document, the resource, that was really contentious. The thing that came up, and again, I'm talking about scripts. Yep. Devising, you've got a whole lot of different areas that you can go with, but with scripts, the argument that myself and the other educator made was, we're studying Shakespeare, we're studying Artaud, we're studying Brecht, we're studying Chekhov. If we don't give permission for students in an educational setting, and that's the bottom line, it's education. It's not for profit. It's not taking work away from First Nations artists. We've suffered from blackface in this country. but the real thing that it came down to is if we don't allow students to embody characters, to develop empathy for characters and study scripts through embodiment, then teachers are not going to look at them. And there's beautiful work in this country that's been produced by First Nations playwrights. And sitting down and reading a text is completely different to getting up and performing it. So that's why we're saying to students and teachers that as long as we understand that it's in an educational setting, and I talked about role identification, my students go to the audience before the performance and they say, "Hi, my name is Jacinta and I am Italian Assyrian, and today I'll be playing the role of Medea, who was a First Nations character." So that we're introducing ourselves as the cultural identity that we are, and then introducing the cultural identity of the character that we're playing. We would never, there's a beautiful musical in Australia called Brand New Day. That should never be put on as your school musical, right? So we're not doing it for profit. It's in the classroom, and we also always seek permission from the playwright. We pay for the production rights for doing that. So yeah, I know it's really icky.
No, Andrew, let me respond to you, because I mean, I loved your presentation and I loved your approach. And I think and the thing is, I mean, we're in very different places. And I think actually I can't speak, and just as you can't speak for all of Australia, I can't speak for all of Canada, right? And there are things happening in very different ways. I mean, I had the privilege of going to a conference in 2016 that was Inspire, which is Indigenous educators all across Canada. And I learned from some amazing educators from British Columbia, which is really far from where I am right now, and Saskatchewan and Manitoba, that were in very different places. And so I mean, the one thing, I mean, you're talking, I agree with you, permission and artists, I use Indigenous texts in my classes. We read them aloud together, and you're right, there is a difference. I would also contend, though, that the personal responses of students really viscerally has them engage with that text in a way that's super meaningful. I hear what you're saying, and I agree with you. But I mean, there's also what we're trying to help with our members is pathways into the work, if that makes sense. And I think all of us are in what we don't really want, and I think you would agree with this, we don't want people not engaging with stuff, because then nothing happens, nothing changes. And as artists, as educators, as drama teachers, we are that provocation for change. I know I'm a little biased in this, but I believe all of us in this work are changing the world. And I know we all feel that way. Every student that comes in our classes is transformed by that experience. And I think that the pathway in relationship, you talked all about building relationships, you talked all about acknowledgements. It's great. I mean, I buy tons of texts from First Nations authors in Canada because I want, that's why those voices are out there. They are the authentic voices. They're creating this work to share those stories. And actually, one of our on our In a Good Way document, it's funny because my friend Troy Miracle, who is our Indigenous education lead and is a Haudenosaunee man, his sister-in-law is a playwright in Canada named Alanis King, and she's Anishinaabe from unceded Council of the Three Fires Territory, Wikwimikong. And so if you look at, I love your presentation, because I was oh, I should have got maps of Canada to show certain things, because you see dark little spots where there's nothing, because I should rephrase that thing when I said we're all treaty people, because we're not. We have unceded territory in Canada, but it's not all of it. We have a lot of territory that's covered under the numbered treaties and historical treaties, and honoring those treaties is super important, because we're not doing that. And but there's unceded territory, and I've been to Wikwimikong, which is unceded, and they both helped us craft our In a Good Way document, which is ways in for our code members. And so I think we all need to find that pathway, right? Because reconciliation is so important. And we both talked about intention. And sometimes, though, as I said, like, we all make mistakes. I could tell you about things I did 10 years ago that I'm like, I shake my head at, like, young Matthew, what were you thinking? And it's all about finding that, about learning from those mistakes and just moving forward. So I think that both of us talked about very different approaches, but I think the number one takeaway is build relationships and build that community with your Indigenous partners.
Yeah, and just adding on to what you just said then about making mistakes, I talk to so many teachers who are saying, like, I really want to do this, but I'm so afraid. I'm like riddled with fear about doing it wrong, offending, mucking it up. And I say two things. The first thing is that our country, 3% of our population is First Nations. In Victoria, 1% of our teaching population is First Nations. It cannot be put, that weight of that on education cannot be put onto their shoulders. It is a collective responsibility. We all, as educators, have the responsibility to make sure that every child that we teach learns about the original culture of this land. So
I agree.
That's the first thing. And the second thing is, what's worse than being afraid is not doing it. Like you said, make a mistake, learn from your mistake. Don't make the mistake twice, because then you're in it. But, as teachers, we've got to be learners as well. So we need to learn, we need to research, we need to understand things before we teach it. And you know what? You probably will make a mistake. You probably will do something wrong. Good. Learn from it, grow, do it better next time.
But Andrew, that goes along with the whole notion of talking about decolonizing our practice, though, because I mean, like, there's that old, because we have to be honest with our students that we're also learners in this context, and that we don't. It's okay not to know. Let's go find some answers together. But yet that old adage of, I'm the sage on the stage. I know everything, and I'm going to imbue you with my wisdom, is a colonized approach, though, right? I mean, like, it's all about that. I am the patriarch. I am going to now tell you what I know. Whereas, like, we need those students bringing that their voices, their expertise, and learning with us. And I think that's we're on the same page 100%. We have in Canada, 4% of the population is Indigenous, and I didn't say this because it wasn't part of my presentation, but it's also the fastest growing population in Canada. But yet, when you look at statistics like, I'm throwing this out there, but it's something upwards of 20 to 25% of our incarcerated population are Indigenous. And a lot of that has to do with over-policing of Indigenous communities.
It's a lot higher here.
And we have, we just had in 2019, our inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls tie up with 231 calls for justice. Which we also look at. I bring that into the drama classroom, and so it's like we have a lot, like we have there's some good parallels between Australian history and Canadian history. Unfortunately, tying to a certain colonial powers that we don't need to get into right now to get but I agree with you, because I've had this conversation. It's not, reconciliation is not the job of Indigenous people. Reconciliation is our job.
Yeah.
But we talked about, like, I just participated in we have this a YouTube series called Code Conversations that I've woefully left not getting published enough. And we just had a conversation using questions about using Indigenous subject matter in the classroom with my friend Troy Miracle was there, a good friend, Arwen Carpenter, who did a presentation with me at our Code Conference on that subject. We used a bunch of the questions that were generated from that. And one thing that came up was that was around, like, shame and guilt. And I said, you know what, the only thing if you're learning about something that you didn't know about, you shouldn't feel shame and guilt about that. You can feel uncomfortable about it, but if you don't do anything about it, if you're not embedding this in your practice, in your drama classroom, to create these conversations and build this knowledge around social justice and reconciliation and decolonization, that's what you should feel guilty about. And that's what you should feel shame about. I'm sorry, we have not got to a single question from anyone. It's just the Andrew and Matt conversation show now.
No, this is wonderful, and I must tell you, it is the same thing that what is the holistic approach? This is what we are researching together. And I think what you're talking is much wider than the notion of our field, drama, theater, and education. It is the holistic approach to a nation, to a land, to a country, to something, that what is it about? And the kids, the children, the young people, the seniors we teach must acknowledge and understand how complex the world is, and that how we function, and just grab it all, perceive it all, and research it all through drama, theater, and education. And I just really believe we grow through it, and we become better persons through it. And I'm really thinking, we had the war in the 90s in my country, when Yugoslavia, that was for me a wonderful country, broke up. And then we did a lot of anti-war activist performance pieces. I was very active as a theater artist, and still am. And we used to travel around, and people used to say, you are lucky because you have all this war going on, and civil war. You have so many inspiring ideas, and this is why you make so many strong performances. And my first reaction, my God, aren't you aware that every country has its war? Every country has its difficulties, problems, context, and you have to face it as an artist, and you have to face the people you work with if you're an educator with it, and to understand. You cannot make things right, But I love what you said, Matthew, about that you cannot. There is if you just dwell in guilt. And if we dwell in our responsibility, we can't change things that happened in the past. But it is our guilt and responsibility if we don't deal with it. It was such a strange coincidence, because we are thousands of kilometers or miles away. And I was exactly writing that sentence when you were saying it, like about guilt, and about shame, and about what is the responsibility. And I think just to be aware, this is what is happening, this is what happened, let's research it, let's talk about it together,
but let's do something about it.
I really admire the work that you do. And I have to say also, there is a lot of sensitivity there, because we have to be sensitive, and we have to, and of course we make mistakes. I work with also people with disability, and there is always this issue with terminology, how to address, because the terminology keeps changing. It is very sensitive. So you have to be, you just have to accept everyone as a human being, and be very open. And I think this is another word that is so important. It is the openness. It is the acceptance. And it is the reciprocity, that we learn, we give, we share, we are generous, but we also receive, we learn, we get. And it's this interchange that really helps. And for me, this is the holistic approach. Also this reciprocity that
100%. I think like you hit the nail on the head, Sonia. That, I mean, when you said reciprocity, I was thinking about like how, like, it's that's like when because we all create that little community with our students in the classroom, right? Like I just had a bunch of one-on-one conversations with my grade 9s, and they all taught. That's actually almost every single one of them came back to like what they were surprised about was how much they were building relationships with people they never thought they'd build relationships with. And we can extend that to think about the communities that we need to build relationship with, to bridge those gaps. Because like I know that like from my perspective and from a Canadian perspective, like we still have a reserve system where there's the First Nations reserves, and a lot of Caucasian Canadians, or settlers will say, to be more, or even migrants, have never set foot on a reserve. I've been privileged to be able to visit a few, but they're very different. and they're very diverse across the country. So when you're in an area, it's always super important to build a relationship with people close by. And it helps demystify things too, because one thing that's helped perpetuate, like even in a dramatic perspective or in theater, and this is why I liked Andrew's comments about embodying, but it's also like there are a lot of historical texts that people go to that keep First Nations people in the past. Like, look, this was a past thing. They're right here. They exist.
Yeah.
And
or
we need to
othering.
bring that in.
Yeah, or othering, you know.
Oh yeah, 100%.
The others. So if they are present, then they are the others. You know, that they're not the the important ones, the focus.
Yeah.
It's them on the outside and the outskirts.
Well, Andrew, to go on what you just said there, I was just having a conversation not that long ago with someone who said they wanted about getting Indigenous and non-Indigenous students together to share cultures with each other. And I said, you know, like those teenagers that you're talking about probably are all into the same stuff. Like, I mean, they're listening to the same music. They're, and I mean, and also never, because of our residential school system and the 60 scoop and other things in Canada, we have, like, there are so many indigenous teenagers from across Canada who don't know anything about their culture because it was taken from them. And right. So to think that they could to teach other people, that's not their responsibility.
Yeah, and that's one thing that we talk about as well. If you are doing, say in my example, if you're doing a play and you have an Indigenous student in your class, don't assume that that student is going to be able to tell the other students in the class about their culture, because they may not. Don't assume that they will want to play the First Nations character. Maybe they want to play the white person. You know, have a conversation with them, see where they're at. But the only thing we know about kids of today, the only cultural thing that we know is that they're all on TikTok. You know, that's the commonality they've got. You know.
I once mistakenly called TikTok Tic Tac, and it's stuck. Everyone's like, "Oh, you're such an old man, Mr. Sheahan," because I've never used TikTok ever. I don't know how it works. I know my kids know how, my own children know how it works, but I don't know how it works. And like, you're right. It's and like I've resisted. Like I find like because I do use technology in my classroom, but I find like that I also like to just have people physically. It's about the physical presence of each other in space. That's why when I was talking about that example of the children's story, Gavin's Purpose, which is phenomenal. It was when we were online, and I was trying to creatively think, what can we do? And like, it's so like, I don't know how anyone else's experience was like, but I'd be like staring at a sea of cameras turned off, like, "Hey everyone, who's willing to turn your camera on?" They're like, and I had a few, but I had to get really creative with how we were, you know, creating stuff online. And that product came out of that, and it's something I go back to all the time because I'm like, wow, like there were other great ones too, like there were other great children's stories, but it was just really cool and really engaging. And if we can get all students thinking about not just their place within the wider frame of the whole universe, the country, the world, that's a beautiful thing. Because you're right, Andrew, we other things all the time. Even we're trying to bring in like other areas of the world, whether I'm looking at it from like a Canadian perspective or you from an Australian perspective, we have that capacity to other, based on if we're not talking about the commonalities that we have, or like the here and now and the present, right? Beyond Indigenous education. And that's really, and we're 100% on the same page on that.
I have a question I wanted to ask. It is for Matthew, because you had at the very end these very interesting circles about, colonizing.
You mean that? You mean that?
So exactly. And I just wanted to ask you, because I'm my mother tongue is not English, and I don't understand everything. So I didn't understand what is in the red one. Indigenous data sovereignty. How do you
sovereignty? So if you look at the difference in the colonizing model to decolonizing, thinking about decolonization, it leads down to this. So one thing, and I know there's we have commonalities. I'm going to stop sharing my screen because we can all see that right there. From Canada and Australia and other areas it was around erasing identity and erasing sovereignty and self-determination. So the residential school system, the Indian Act in Canada, the reserve system, actually what most people don't realize is that, and most Canadians who haven't learned this don't realize, is that our reserve system was created by the Indian Act, that's law in Canada. And it's not traditional governance. It was to eradicate traditional governance. And we actively tried to make Indigenous people in Canada reliant upon the government or government services in order to control. And so self-determination and sovereignty through decolonization it's about reassertion of traditional rights. The rights are different. We have treaties with Indigenous people that we are not honoring. And so there are a lot of misconceptions in Canada. Some misconceptions are that Indigenous people get things for free. My tax dollars are paying for these Indigenous people. What we don't realize is that our entire country is built upon the wealth taken from Indigenous lands. Like, I mean, if you think of Canada, like you think of forests, oil, all sorts of stuff, all that has been harvested from Indigenous land and paid for the wealth that I experience as a settler. And I have deep settler roots. Like my grandmother's family immigrated from England to the US prior to the American War of Independence, fought with the British. I don't know if anyone's familiar with who won that war. It wasn't the British. And then moved up to where I am now in the 1700s because they couldn't stay in the States because they lost the war. And so I recognize that as part of my family history. And so when people talk to me about, you know, settler this or whatever, I'm like, you know, I have deep settler roots in Canada, and I recognize all the things that have gone wrong because of I'm going to go back. I'm going to show you. So I talked about the two-row wampum in our land acknowledgements. I showed a picture of it, but it's I'm going to show you a picture right now because it's written when I talk about all of us being treaty people. Sorry, I'm totally commandeering this this conversation here. So this, if you can see my screen right here, and I'm circling right here, this is the Goswenta, or the two-row wampum. Okay, this was created to acknowledge the original agreement between Indigenous peoples and settlers, and mainly between the Dutch and the Haudenosaunee, but it's become a symbol of what that relationship should look like. And it's basically two boats or two canoes going along and existing together, but not interfering with each other. Well, when we come to understand Canadian history, one boat definitely knocked another one off course. And getting back to this, I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. Getting back to that relationship is what's key. But that's like the responsibility for that. So self-determination and sovereignty is a decolonizing principle. We need to have, because like, if you look at Indigenous people all the way across Canada, it's so different. Just like it would be in Australia, like their cultures are different. There's a lot of similarities because, like, you know, you can look at any spirituality and there's certain things they might have in common. But the one thing though is that there's power in being who you are and having control over your own destiny. And the way the Indian Act is set up in Canada takes that away. And the government is that patriarchal force and controls their lives.
And similarly in Australia, the unifying thing between all of the different countries of First Nations people in Australia was about honouring country, honouring land. And again, like you were saying, that's been taken away from them because their traditional sites have been decimated by mining companies. That, you know, skyscrapers are being built, burial grounds are being, you know, repositioned as residential areas. So for us, it's all about our First Nations people are all about we respect and we love and we give thanks to the land, and the land then gives that back to us by feeding us and housing us and giving medicine to us. So Yeah, that was really interesting that you said
I would
that.
argue everything comes back to the land.
Yes. To be honest, I think this is the only direction that humanity can go, is actually incorporating again these traditions. I just had a revelation while talking to you. You know, there is this last year in BITEF, the famous Belgrade International Theatre Festival, it was all about immersive theater, how much immersive theater is important and so on. And then it was like, immersive theater. I was at this this Native Indians sweat lodge in America, and that was the most wonderful experience of immersive theater I ever had. So immersive theater is nothing new. It is something that has been practiced for centuries, you know, in different indigenous communities. So it's about, you know, embracing and returning to these basic elements that are so important for us to continue as mankind, as humankind, as, you know, womankind, all kinds. So just to be able to survive all these catastrophes and different things that are happening, I really believe. And maybe, you know, not deny technology, because it's technology that is making us meet right now, but just incorporating this approach that is also holistic.
Well, Sonia, think about this. I mean, the fact that we're able to meet and have this conversation without getting on planes, flying across oceans, which, I mean, I love to travel. I mean, I love being with all of you in Iceland, but this is actually, the utilization of technology is a greener approach in a lot of ways, because I mean, we're able to have this conversation here about different things that are happening in Australia and in Canada. And the idea has been great at having so many great webinars happening that are putting ideas out there, and that we don't have to always be physically present.
Yes.
And that's great if we're talking about carbon footprint and our effect on the environment. But when you talked about it, it's funny, you mentioned I've done a sweat before, and talking about an immersive experience. That was one of the most amazing experiences of my life. But that's what I'm talking about, like, you know, enriching yourself. Like, it was an immersive experience, but like, it's funny because a friend of mine, when we talk about spirituality and stuff, a friend of mine who is Indigenous said, no one would ever walk into a church, watch a church, something happening, right? And then try to recreate that. Like, well, I saw a priest do it, so here, let me baptize that baby for you. But yet we do have teachers who are like, because I mean, I participated in a sweat. I've done like hoop dancing with a young man from Wikwemekong. I've done round dancing, and those are all for me. I was taught by people, and but I didn't then think, okay, I can do this now, because we wouldn't do that, right? I mean, we wouldn't go, all right, you know, body of Christ, because
Magic. Can I please read? There is Natasha was here, Natasha Byrne, and she wrote in the chat, Andrew, Matthew, thank you so much for your amazing presentations and your conversation. It was very interesting. It is very interesting, inspiring. I have to leave the meeting to prepare to teach my Zoom students. Best of luck to you with everything. Natasha Byrne, teaching artist from Washington, D.C., USA. So I wanted to read the comment so that, you know, there are other people also listening. It's not only us, even though we are so, I think, amazed and amused and interested in this conversation. I just would like to maybe say that maybe it's slowly time for us to end. And I know it's really late for Andrew, and I hope that the morning light has come to Matthew.
I'm in my base. I don't have a window in here, so it's okay. I'm going to go upstairs and go, the sun.
It's the sun. Yes, it's the daytime. And Adriana is here. Thank you, Adriana, again, for being with us. So would you like to say, yes, Andrew?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say thank you so much. This has been wonderful. Yeah. Thank you.
I would also like to say thank you, but I also want to point out that I love the fact that you're cutting us off in this conversation, because that's exactly what Andrew and I are talking about. It's an ongoing conversation. It's not ever going to stop. They shouldn't stop.
It
So we need to
shouldn't.
keep that going.
This is just
Yeah.
the beginning, and I have really, we will have soon the meeting of the IDEA online working group. And I think one of the ideas that I will suggest is to have an ongoing series of webinars considering this subject, the holistic approach, because we had last Sunday, that was the IDEA Day celebration, online celebration. We had our new member from India, who is using Kathakali in his drama education. He's doing, traditional different performing arts techniques from India to do
Awesome.
drama education. And for me, it's very, very interesting. I would like to amplify this subject. And I really want to thank you for this amazing session. I have learned so much. I have learned so much. Thank you with all my heart. And I believe it's a wonderful contribution to the IDEA community and to the wider community, not only considering drama, theater, and education, but considering all aspects of us as being humans in this world, and acceptance and being what we should be, and openness and continuing together to the future, to the next 7 generations or even more. So thank you so much.
Thank you both. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. And thank you, Adriana, also for being with us.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right. Good night.
Good night. Have a great
good morning.
day. Have a great weekend. Thank you
You
so
too.
much.
Bye-bye.
Yes. And